This is from the Metamorphosis by Ovid. Here, while young Proserpina, among the maids, diverts herself in these delicious shades, while like a child with busy speed and care, she gathers lilies here and violets there, while first to fill her little lap she strives, hell's grisly monarch at the shade arrives, sees her thus sporting on the flowery green, and loves the blooming maid as soon as seen. His urgent flame impatient of delay, swift as his thought he seized the beauteous prey, and bore her in his sooty car away. The frighted goddess to her mother cries, but all in vain, for now far off she flies, where the hills, the ravisher and valleys speeds, by name encouraging his foamy steeds. He rattles o'er their necks the rusty reins, and ruffles with the stroke their shaggy manes. O'er lakes he whirls his flying wheels, and comes to the palace eye, breathing sulphurous fumes. Again, this is from Ovid's Metamorphosis, an early Roman masterwork, actually. Pretty sure it's Roman, not Greek. And so this is the story of Pluto's kidnapping of Pros Proserpina to the underworld, having been shot with one of Cupid's arrows, and thus spotting her fields of Nissa, and thus abducting her and taking her to the underworld. Although there are many variations of the story of there being a kidnapping or her going willfully into the underworld, this is really the story of all of us who have Pluto very close to one of our personal planets in our astrology blueprint chart. It's especially common when you see Pluto interacting with Venus or the moon. If it's the moon, usually it's the mother that takes the child on the journey to the underworld. If it's Venus, it's a lover. If it's Mars, it's a competitor or destroyer. If it's Mercury, it's one's mind. One's mind becomes one's hell, one's journey to the underworld. And if it's the sun, it's another story, which I'll get into in a different video. But for now, I'm going to do this video on Pluto. This will be in the context of the astrology chart, but I will also put it in the context of Pluto being one of the three outer planets, or one of the three wandering gods. And as I summarized recently in a lecture I did, the three invisible planets outside of the sphere of Saturn's reality, which is the reality that's upheld as the supernal reality, and thus as the highest archon. Saturn controls our third density reality, and but not without incursions from terrorists and interruptions and massacres and destructions and interruptions and confusions. And these terrorists are, in a sense, these outer planets that are not visible to the naked eye. And so these three planets represent some level of mystification, because for us humans, it's a warning to not become too rigid in our set structures of reality. Everything has its time, as Saturn reminds us, and there's a time of decay and a time of loss, where the structures that we utilize in our lives is no longer working. And so in those moments, Saturn becomes weak. and there are incursions into our reality. And some of the examples of those incursions are brought forth by these outer planets. Uranus represents the first of which seems to incur sudden interruptions of our seeming reality by exposing cracks in the realm through visions of precognition. Uranus represents sudden awareness, sudden glimpses of the future. And this highlights and underscores our clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, our own moments where we perceive beyond the veil of temporality. And what I mean is beyond the veil of perceiving reality in mundane time. Uranus actually exposes us to the possibility of perceiving time from the higher self. And people have spoke about this in accidents where time suddenly slows down and all of a sudden you're perceiving from the seat of the higher self and you can perceive reality in milliseconds as everything seems to slow down. These incursions on Saturnian minute by minute reality also disrupt temporality, thus showing us that our seemingly real Saturnian reality is a construct first and foremost, and ultimately. And this falsity is represented by these incursions into our reality that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto make. The second planet is represented by Neptune. Now, Neptune confuses our seeming reality by exposing the fissures in this realm. The fissures in this realm by presenting images and screens and visions and fantasies which meld into our reality, so much so that we can barely tell what is real and what is not. And we're going through that right now with Neptune having recently ingressed into Aries. A new kind of movie is playing before humanity. And this theme has to do with the lone vigilante or the lone warrior, which Aries symbolizes, or the lone pioneer, the lone master. And so in these next 14, 15 years, Neptune will create grand visions and films of this figure, whoever this figure is, or whoever we impose this identity onto. And thus, Neptune represents martyrs or victims. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two. And Neptune doesn't necessarily represent the source of all reality or energy. It is like almost like a camera lens, a void, a vanishing point from which something is being played out. It provides the imaginative fluid whereby we can create new realities. And this is the power of Neptune, as long as one does not lose their hold on everyday reality. And our hold on everyday reality is borne by the sun and the focal point of awareness which the personality abides by. And the earth, which is not always noted in astrology, but in human design is, as the ground for which all energies and all the rays of all the planets are grounded through and colored by. As the third invisible incursion or wandering god or planet that Pluto is, Pluto symbolizes a complete breakdown of the structures of reality. Without exaggeration, Pluto represents the horror, the terror, and the pain one feels, almost to the point of unbearableness, as one's structures are torn down. The experience of our structures of reality being torn down causes a fragmentation of awareness. Ultimately, Pluto is so heavy and is so intense that most of us can barely bear our five senses of reality when we're going through Plutonic experiences. And usually, very little is known until afterwards, until long after the experience. And that's symbolized by Pluto wearing a helmet. In this particular image, he's not wearing a helmet because he's visible in the underworld. But when Pluto visits the overworld, the surface of the earth, to kidnap or to take down someone who's visiting the underworld, Pluto will put on a helmet of invisibility. And so the underworld is also a realm of invisibility. And thus, we don't even know we're there sometimes. All we know is that we're just not here. We're just not that present with others. And though we go through unbearable amounts of pain and disconnect and possible disconnection with Pluto, it's so important to endure the experience because easily by artificial means we can slow down, delay, arrest, or freeze our awareness through the use of stimulants, artificial treatments. You guys know the score on that. And this will cause the ability to transform, to transcend. It'll delay that and it'll cause problems in the psyche. So, as humans can, it's best to do the best you can to endure your experience with Pluto without using artificial means to endure it. Although taking care of yourself is important, and if that's what's needed, that's what's needed. Your transcendence will just be delayed. And this really only lasts, this destruction that Pluto portends only lasts as long as the old structures are completely disseminated in time for a rebuilding and new structures to be created. Another level of this transcendence that could be denied is if the ego refuses to allow itself to be consumed. Part of our constructs of reality relate to the construct the ego organizes it in its life. And so sometimes the ego must die as well. As a song, Pluto represents an intervallic dissonance that builds and builds until all is destroyed. Perhaps best represented by certain types of metal albums like Nightbringers, Death in the Blackwork, or there's an industrial album by Dead World called Thanatos Descends. Two great albums that lyrically portend the destruction which Pluto creates in cracks that are already present in one's structures and reality. Now it's important to understand that once Pluto is turned on, it does not stop. And Pluto can build just as much as it can destroy. It can consecrate as much as it can desecrate. And in its process, it will increase and gather momentum until the structures one has set forth, once strong and solid, become disintegrated. This happens deep in the house where one has Pluto located in their astrology chart, or the gate that one has Pluto in their human design chart. Now, simply put, in human design, Pluto represents the part of the chart where it is a truth that you're returning to over and over again in this life until it is clear. In astrology, it represents where you are at as as a simultaneous incarnation. And it represents your maturity level, whether you're just beginning a new carnation cycle or ending an age-old cycle. There is a mystique and a mystery around Pluto because it does represent invisible forces and thus rules possession, destruction, rebirth, transcendence, authenticity, and truth. It also represents our deepest, most suppressed, repressed, and unconscious aspects of ourselves, and thus represents sexuality as well as the force that it is, which is the source of all energy in this verse. And thus Pluto moves with great power, and we all wield this power within us. But Pluto being a realm of power, it is also the realm of the fool, because it is just as all three of the outer planets, it is bigger than egoic forces, thus attempting to wield its power as if one would attempt to wield Neptune's power or Uranus's power will always be met with failure, because these are forces that incur from outer planes that are much larger than Saturnian reality. And thus the only choice, or rather the way to deal with them, is to surrender one's will to that will. And this is the important realization and respect for these principles and these powers. So wherever Pluto is in your chart is where you're coming to terms. It is where you fight the battles of your ego, and where you fight or allow the merger between self and shadow. It is the place where you make enemies or friends or intimates of horror, more moral terror, and the pain of truth. It is the accountability of the self brought to the light, to the flame of heart realization in one's own reality. Simply put, as human design describes it, Pluto is the truth you revisit and revisit over and over again until it becomes you. I'm going to pause for us to take that in. And just to add, these are notes from a lecture I did in the Bay Area on the outer planets. And some of this is new material that I added to it. I'm going to restart this second part by reading a quote from The Night Side of Eden by Kenneth Anger. Pluto represents the outermost power zone, the pylon set at the outermost ring of the solar system, beyond which stretch the vasts of outer space. When applied to human consciousness, it represents the pylon at the gates of the sanctuary of inner space, a gateway that opens up during the death of personal extinction, becoming one with a god. This realm is not accessible to the human. By that, what is meant is Pluto symbolic of death. This much is clear, as Pluto represents the realm of the Thoth in Kabbalah, which is a realm that's not visible in the tree of life. It doesn't have a number, but it is in the center, and it is well, I won't get so esoteric, but those of you who study the right or left-hand path will know of this symbol. There's this quote from the song called Allegiance by this UK doom metal band called Esoteric. And I think it's from a film, but I haven't yet found out what film it's from. And it's some guy screaming, and you hear the echoes. What light? I got no light. I'm in the dark. You understand? I'm in the dark. And so this is the forces that Pluto represents. It represents the soul in darkness, and the spark is the flame of the soul of life. And if one keeps one's spark, one can find their way in the dark, or one can search within and find a candle to a light in the alcove of the heart and wield one's deeper awareness and deeper truths and come to terms with the horror that one's felt in one's life. Because when we come to the truth of ourselves, truth represents itself by us coming to terms with all the horrors we have felt, and just feeling them out and doing our best not to attach shame or self-judgment or self-condemnation to it, but rather self-acceptance. Part of this realization comes to kind of negating our religious history and realizing the levels and depths of our programming. Even the idea of karma itself is a huge program, because if this realm is indeed a game of sorts, and astrology is the symbolic language of this game, then we experience what we experience. And we do the best we can to move forward in such a way with the goal. And this is perhaps just my take on it. The goal being to come to as much balance as one can. Now, a lot of people wouldn't agree with me here. Some people feel that the goal of this life is to reach the light of awareness, the light of truth, the light of ascension, to become one with the oneness, or perhaps to escape this realm and just be the oneness yourself with your own being, with your own soul and spirit. Others feel that the light is bent and that one's reality and power is better diverted to making future incarnations hospitable or prepared and empowered. So as there are many takes, I feel that it's important that one learns to come to balancing the polarities in oneself. Because it's quite clear in this game that the gold is in our energy, and how we feed this game is by putting our energy in polarities, either one side or the other. And by doing that, we lose our own levels of awareness and centeredness. And so I don't believe, because believing is programming. Anyone can believe anything. Belief has always been a part of the programming. What I feel is correct is knowingness and knowledge, which is such a problem in this age of the oversaturation of information. But what we can strive for to some extent is to find balance. And I mean balance in our understanding, so we're not caught up in polarities and taking sides and going from one side or to the other and constantly playing polarities against ourselves and others. And the planets do seem to represent these geometries. We have oppositions all the time. And so we take on these identifications. In a couple weeks, we'll have Pluto opposing Mars. And so you'll see things get heated again like they did in early January, where someone will take the personification of Mars, someone will take the personification of Pluto, and there will be a battle. But it's really always been a battlefield in terms of human communication and human beingness. It's always been a war inside, and that's why there's wars outside. Because to some extent, we're always fighting to represent who we are, or we're fighting to hide who we are. Either way, it's a battle, but we're always attempting to come to terms with representing who we are as best we can, with the best boundaries that we can, and in balance of expression of who we are. But really, that's not the case with all these incursions into reality and all the planetary chaos which comes from its geometries and its multiple aspects of oppositions, squares, inconjuncts, trines, sextiles, and septiles, and what more have you? Many, many aspects and minor aspects. However, it's just my take that learning to be balanced with a capital B is the most important thing to learn here for a spirit. And that means not being sold and not feeding the large egregores of thoughts that reign around us, or the large egregores of, in human design, they call it the Wa, in magic egregores, and in reality transurfing, they call it pendulums. I feel to some degree it's the goal to not feed these mass thought mechanisms or cults of intelligences that take control of human beings and human energy. And I'm not getting off track because I want to talk about something that astrologers often talk about, but I want to put it in this context. And that is that Pluto, to some extent, does seem to represent some kind of twin flame or karmic relationships between souls, in the sense that Plutonic energy magnetizes individuals. It makes them seem very sexual, very magnetic, and attracting of others, and especially to others that have just as intense aspects with them that are Plutonic. And what this often represents is something that psychology has caught up with and astrology has caught up with, but still is not widely enough known. And that is that the healthiest relationships represented by humanity are those which are boring and normalized by day-to-day patterns. Too often, when we're magnetized to another person, when we're excited, when we're lit up, when we can barely occupy our body, those are the representations and expressions of toxicity. And usually there's Pluto aspects that follow. Now, at the same point, one cannot doubt the intensity and the amazing intensity of Pluto Moon or Pluto Venus aspects. But the malefic representation of those aspects in the square, opposition, and sometimes the conjunction, it is very important to be aware that no balance will come out of those relationships. And it is only with perhaps, you know, I shouldn't say that as a generalization, but it's very likely the intensity is just too much. The moon represents our instinct, our most major programming, and thus it's a deep part of our instinctual beingness. And to have someone else's Pluto impact that is almost irreparable after the experience ends. But it's also a type of magic. It also has a very magical, very familiar power. And Venus can be similar. But in those negative, malefic aspects, it's too much, usually. But to your own discretion, to your own choice. The easier aspects are also problematic, as another astrologer recently reminded me of the ease by which Pluto gains power in a trine, and perhaps sometimes a sextile. But it's still a more harmonic representation of the conveyance of the energy from one person to another. And the conjunction depends on the sign placement, depends on the degree or the orb of the aspect. So there are many factors in synastry. Of course, this can also be looked at in the composite chart, as well as in a human design composite chart. In the human design composite chart, you would look at the lines and see if the electromagnetics meet with harmonic lines with each other, like a 1 with a 1, or a 3 with a 3, or a 1 with the 4, or 3 with the 6, or 2 with the 5. Talking about the gates, each gate has a line. Now, in summary, in a relationship, Pluto does represent very intense experiences which subjugate the ego. And like the metaphor of the outer planets, cause incursions on the personal ego of the self and the contained self of the relationship. As I mentioned in the beginning, Pluto conjunct the luminaries. I was going to leave for another video, and I think I will. The effect, the consequences, depending on the orb, even in transit, Pluto has a major effect on one's sun or moon. And it is very important to know how to navigate during such transits and cycles. Currently, Pluto is in Aquarius, and it will be there for the next 25 years. It will be really affecting Aquariuses, Aquarius suns, Aquarius moons, as well as the opposite sign, which is Leo suns and Leo moons, as well as the signs that are squared, which would be Taurus suns and moons and Scorpio suns and moons. But for now, it will only be in the early degrees. So I'm talking about October Scorpios, Talking about April Tauruses. I'm talking about early Aquariuses, January born Aquariuses, and August born Leos. I think I'll leave it at that. I was hoping to make a very long video because I don't think I have enough long videos. Let me see if I can add anything else. There's a bunch more I had in my notes, but I think I'll leave it at that. Hopefully, this was very helpful to you guys. I'll put in the notes. It'd be great if someone could put in the time signatures of the themes I talk about, but maybe I'll learn to do that at some point. Hope this was helpful to you all. And if there's questions or comments, please put them in the chat. Thank you so much for listening. And thanks for liking and subscribing. And the best to you all during these days of Gate 51. Next Thursday, I'll drop another Gate video. It'll be Gate 42, which the sun will enter into next Thursday, Friday. And that's it.